Everyone seems to know about command starts and pan heaters, but I don't think most people know about these heaters. I sourced my heater from PRO-WEST.CA. We're going to get a little bit more into it here on how it works, how it operates, and a little unboxing. Because my heater's packed away in the S6, I stopped in at PRO-WEST.CA for a couple examples that might make this a little clearer on how it operates. So the model I have in the S6 is the hydronic S3 unit. It is gasoline powered. Now it can do, it does 17,000 BTU of providing heat. So yeah, you can just look in this. Hopefully it comes out clear so you can actually pause and take a look at the pamphlet here without having to load it up. But yeah, I'm going to tell you, it works really, really well. So obviously it's a heater, but how does this heater operate? We're going to go through some of the components and maybe a little diagram to kind of how this plays out, but basically it has its own fuel supply. It's remote mounted, so in my case it's mounted in the left front of the car. It has an internal fuel injector that makes a flame front, which in turn heats up the coolant passage, and we have an electric coolant pump that circulates that coolant. Then obviously it has an exhaust too. In this lovely picture it has a muffler, but yeah, it doesn't need that. Not for my case. All right, let's get into what's actually in one of these kits. So, obviously, in a whole bunch of packaging. Basically, there's an install kit, the mounting brackets, coolant adapters. If I'm not mistaken, I think you can run the coolant 90 degrees out of the unit or straight out of the unit. A couple adapters for the water pump mounting. I believe you also get the fuel pump mounting in here, as well as some exhaust clamps and components for that. Right, that's the tip for the exhaust. So yeah, we got some fuel line here, which is 2 millimeter inside diameter, which is tiny. I think I actually ran mine inside of a vacuum line the whole way of the car, if I'm not mistaken, because it runs on the outside of the car. And obviously I drive it in winter, so I put it through some hell. But not to say that that nylon couldn't handle it, I'm sure it could. All right, so we've got a couple coolant, just a coolant hose. You obviously cut to fit. This isn't the only thing. You're probably gonna end up using some bulk hose. That's what I used, was bulk, to run it to my components. And then yeah, we've got the basic wiring harness, electrical feeds, even comes with a fuse, all set up, good to go. This is what the exhaust and inlet pipes look like. So yes, it does have an inlet because you are combusting inside of the heater. So you're going to need some air to do some combusting. It's not going to work otherwise. And then we get into the heater, and I believe the fuel pump sitting up there. So here's this little itty bitty fuel pump, transfer pump. This particular kit is actually for a diesel, but it basically is the same idea. We're going to see difference here, diesel to gas, but it's practically exactly the same kit. Alright, little instruction manual. There's your straight coolant hoses if you wanted to run it that way. And then here is a heater. If we can get it out of the box. Alright, we have the heater sitting there, which is just a full unit as opposed to the cutaway. Right, with the built-in ECU and such. Here's the coolant pump. Right. Just a remote mounted coolant pump. Nice funky mount on the bottom, rubber mounted, so it doesn't go to crap. All right, let's get into how this actually works. So basically, there are some pickup tubes. This is more of an automotive application. This is more of like a diesel truck application. But yeah, most of the Audis will have, I believe, a pickup tube or an empty spot on the fuel sending unit, and you can kind of tap into that to get to the other side or inside the fuel tank, and then you'd run your pickup tube all the way to the bottom of the tank, because obviously if it doesn't pick up fuel, the heater's not going to run. So the lines will run from that. Let's say we're out of the tank, it'll run from this component or this pickup tube, so to speak, into your fuel pump. You run your fuel pump, it runs it all the way to wherever your heater is mounted through this little fuel line. And then you'll see on the bottom of this heater, there's this little line on the bottom. All right, that's where your fuel inlet is. It comes into the bottom of the heater. You'll see this little U, so to speak, bent in there. That is basically your fuel injector. Now that will go into this other tab. Now obviously they're going to have some correct terminology for this, but basically the fuel is atomized right in this area. We're going to spray it here, and then we have an igniter just on the other side of that, which obviously gives you your spark, and then you have your flame front. Your flame front goes along this whole area. So yeah, we have the flame front, and then we also have the exhaust. I should get that into that a little bit, which would come around the outside and go down to the end, outside, and then through the bottom, out the bottom of the unit. And then we have a coolant chamber on the outside of this whole heat chamber, and our coolant will come into the top of this unit and be pumped around. Obviously there's in and out there, and then our external coolant pump will run to your engine to heat it up. Now in my particular case, I ran that on I picked up out of the outlet of the engine into the heater core, because I wanted it to heat the interior as well as the engine. So mine basically will run the heater inside the car, clean off the windows, and also heat up the whole engine, so we don't have any kind of like super cold starts, which is fantastic. Now, as far as control goes, there's a couple different timers. The one I run is this one, the Easy Start timer, but there's also Easy Start Pro. It's just the newer version of mine. I'm sure it has a couple different other features, you know, feedback for codes and such. But for my particular install, it's relatively straightforward and basic, let's say. With my timer, I ran a negative input that came out of my remote start to trigger the timer to turn on the heater. Now the downside of that, running it that way, is that it doesn't have any feedback. Now the feedback functionality is completely available from Espar, and you can look into that independently. I basically just look to see if the heater is running, and it's quite obvious. There's exhaust coming out of my left front fender, so yeah, it's running. But it does work great, and it has a built-in timer too. Sorry, I should mention that. So let's say in the morning, mine is actually set for 120 minutes of runtime before I depart. So needless to say, yeah, there's 0 cold start, and my interior is warm. I'm kind of spoiled, I'm not gonna lie. It's fantastic. The other thing that I did to integrate this Espar into the Audi S6 is I ran an auxiliary battery. Now, why would I run an auxiliary battery? Well, the fear is that there's no voltage available to start the car, and nobody wants to be in that scenario. Now, one of the other reasons I really did it is because I wanted to run the interior fan. The interior fan is a huge consumer, and even when I do use it now, I use it on maybe like 3 bars of fan control, so it doesn't draw too much. But basically how it plays out is the car has its factory battery. There are cables running from that factory battery to isolator, and on the other side of that isolator is my auxiliary battery, which just runs the interior heater when the Espar is active and for the Espar itself. To be honest, I actually run a plug on the back of the car that runs a battery maintainer to maintain that battery. So I want the functionality, or I want to be able to turn on the heater whenever I so please, no matter what temperature. I want that timer always to come on. And with running an auxiliary battery that's just a lead acid battery, you kind of need to maintain it. You need to hold that voltage. You don't want that to drop. The Espar is voltage sensitive. It is smart enough to not activate under a certain amount of voltage. To avoid those scenarios, I run a battery maintainer only for overnights. So when it sits in my house, outside the garage, it's plugged into my battery maintainer, but at work, it isn't. And it works fine for easily 3-4 starts at work, if need be, on that -30 day, no problem. But I want to have that as an overnight, because I do run basically the fan for 120 minutes before I leave in the morning. So auxiliary batteries, that's why I'm running one, that's why this car has one. And I guess worst case scenario, if I really needed to boost from my auxiliary battery to my car battery, I could do that too. If you want more info, you can reach out to PRO-WEST.CA. They can definitely get you set on the right direction as far as what you'd want for your heater or what you're looking at. And yeah, it's available for gas or diesel. It doesn't matter what component or what kind of vehicle it is. Obviously mine's on an old Audi, so yeah, you can fire up your tractor, your diesel truck, your Huff, whatever else you want to fire up. I don't think it would work on an airplane, but pretty much anything else will work. And believe it or not, even electric vehicles. So Ford Lightning, I think they did an install on. Hey, they got to warm up too. And essentially on electric cars, you're wasting your range if you're heating up the battery and climatizing the battery. So if you can do that in another way, why not? Anyway, I hope you liked the video. Hope it was really informative and kind of cleared up some info about what I'm running on the heater. And if you want to like this, that would be great. Please subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you for the support.
Take care.